Um, Let me just begin with saying I'm very, very happy to be here. There's a number of people here that I've been hoping to meet and that I've been waiting to meet for a while. There are a few projects that I'm kind of curious about. I'm also, after my presentation, when I'm less nervous, I hope I'll get a chance to look at all the interesting stuff on the walls here. So the sound is good? Great. I also prepared this presentation in Swedish, so bear with me. I'm a little bit not into speaking English yet, but I hope that will work out. As you will see, my presentation doesn't contain a lot of words, so translating that part was kind of the easy part. So, my name is Daria. I am not a researcher. I am not the project manager of these awesome projects. I'm a founder and CEO of a company called InUse. We're a design company. And we find ourselves working more and more with Internet of Things related services for clients. And that is one of the reasons why I'm really glad to be here and why I think I am here. But I guess I could say that I think the main reason is that I grew up in a family where the fourth bedroom was, regardless of how many kids we were in the family and regardless of how many bedrooms there were, one bedroom was an electronics lab where I spent my days soldering and monterade electronic circuit boards. Until back in 1993, when I found out about BBSs and the wonderful world of connected computers, which led to me spending the rest of my days playing around with digital stuff. Until 2008. Because then I had a nice problem on my hands. What am I going to do with 18 months of paternity leave? That's like huge amounts of time that I should do something with. So me and some friends, I got a team together. We realized that there were all these new electricity meters back then that were blinking, and there were cheap optical sensors, and there were Arduino playgrounds to be fiddled with. So that's when these two interests of mine started getting together for real. So this was a prototype. I know Matthias mentioned it, so I'm not going to talk a lot about it. We learned a lot from that project. One thing is, for instance, when you have a good idea, the rest of the world also has the same idea. So we wanted to register a power meter on Google App Engine, and we couldn't. And then after a while, a few months, we realized why, because Google had registered power meter for themselves. And now they cancel that project, but anyways. So when we started, there were all these, the same products coming up everywhere, and I felt kind of stressed about it, thinking it would have been nice to be alone for a while. And then I realized that's not how it works today. There's no point in getting stressed out about the fact that you're not going to be the first one, and you're definitely not going to be the only one. It's actually a fantastic thing. So I want to talk more about that. The second big lesson that I learned is that I'm so not an industrial designer. As you can see by these prototypes, I should be staying with digital for my own design sake. But I also realized that the perspective that I come from, and that I should say our company has been based on, is the notion that exciting things happen when you combine three perspectives at least. One, when you see what you can do with new technology. Second, when you understand how people work and why they do so. What are people actually interested in? I met somebody at a mobile company once who said, "Oh, our users, they want to sync their phones." I'm like, nobody wants to sync their phone. You might want to keep updated with work, but you do not want to sync your phone. So there's a difference there. But understanding what people really want and understanding what drives business, what kind of limitations a certain organization has. It can be society as a whole, but very often it's a clear organization. So when you bring these perspectives together, regardless of if you work with industrial design or any other type of design area, it's a powerful thing. And I'm going to give you a few reflections on where that has taken me in this world of Internet of Things. But before that, I just want to finish off with a reflection on this thing about what people want. So I noticed that there are a lot of different products already out there, actually, when it comes to decreasing energy consumption or keeping track of your house's energy consumption or whatever. A lot of them look like and are in fact aimed at somebody I would call technical Tommy. He's the guy who is interested in this stuff. He can separate a kilowatt from a kilowatt hours. I guess most of you can, but let's be honest, a lot of people don't. He's the kind of guy who does this just for the pure sake of it. He will never complain about getting drunk in drowning in data. He loves the data. He wants to hack it himself, and he builds these things. So a lot of early products seem to be aimed towards this guy. Maybe because a lot of us working with it is this guy. I don't know. And then we see products coming to a kind of a second way, which is a prettier version of technical Tommy. Less into it for, well, he's my friend actually, married to another friend of mine. Anyways, less into it for mastering the technology side and quite picky about the look, and it's has a lot to do with status. It's supposed to be not status by knowledge necessarily, but more with gadgets. I don't know, important target group often if you want to be written about in Wired magazine, but from a market perspective. From a value for a society or a bigger company. I would say there's too few projects that really take this type of person as their center of attention. The one who doesn't give a shit. Who can't separate a kilowatt from a kilowatt hour, and who doesn't care about it, who doesn't want to, who thinks about her house as a place to live, maybe hang out with friends, rather than a place to show off, look at my totally smart home, and look at how much I can control it. There are just different things at stake for this type of person. And I just think if we really want to make an impact, we need to think a lot about these people. The people who don't care, how do we still manage to achieve what we want to achieve, decreased energy consumption in for instance. So for all of us who work with this, I would just like to start with that. It's worth thinking about who are we prioritizing when we create things, depending on what we want to achieve. So now I want to dive into what I really wanted to talk about, starting off with, so things are really taking off. There's an estimate of, someone said that 24 billion devices will be connected to the internet by the year 2020. AT&T already have more machines as subscribers than people. So it's a fact that it's happening. It's no longer something that we're actually talking about. The reasons for it, of course, one of the biggest reasons is that it took us this long, but now finally this stuff is cheap enough for anybody to play around with. That makes a huge difference. We don't have to use, we have the processing power and we have the sensors, and we can use all these electronics to play around with. So that's one big thing. But one thing I find is even more interesting is a concept that the founder of TED Talks, Chris Anderson, talked about. He calls it crowd-accelerated innovation. The power of masses. Another colleague of mine, he often talks about how internet, or the fact that we're connected, has to do with human evolution, in the sense of we started taking off when we started being able to communicate at all, verbally, being able to share information. The next step was printing, and now when we can share everything at the light of speed, of course, a lot of stuff is bound to happen. Those of you who have been doing research for a while, how many of you were actually around before, let's say, 98 or 95, when the internet started taking off? A few of you were, right? So would you say that research is slightly different now than it was back then? Where I come from, I think, well, my job didn't even exist, but a lot of things that we do have really changed. So we're seeing now a kind of a critical ecosystem coming into place that makes this crowd-accelerated innovation actually take off. I think Patch Bay is one of the coolest examples of that. For the last couple of years, giving speeches like this, I've been saying, please, for the sake of whatever, talk about having some sort of large-scale initiative. I think, Theo Kanter, if you agree, you were along these lines. Some kind of large-scale initiative that makes sure that we can build on the data sets that are actually being created right now. Because there's so much money being invested in sensors and infrastructure, but you know, all projects are closed. They're keeping this data for themselves. And if we look at it from a global perspective, let's not just dig into what's happening in China with all the smart cities actually being built from scratch, but we need this data to create a lot of valuable services, and we're not going to get that data as long as nobody's sharing. So I think this is actually a critical point for growth. Anyways, so since I'm not like this with decision makers on the right scale, I just talk on stage like this. But what kind of consoles me and makes me optimistic is stuff like PatchBay. So in lack of, we don't have to wait. I mean, a large-scale initiative would make wonders. But in lack of that, it's going to happen anyways. So PatchBay is just a hub, not just a hub. It's a hub for data streams. It's also a hub that provides you with components, like visualization components and whatnot that you would need to build a really creative and good mashup of things. There are a lot of examples. When Fukushima happened, there were mashups built on these data sets showing radiation in real time, and they're still around, and other similar things. So this is already happening, and it's already changing, what would you say, förutsättningarna. Changing the game for a lot of businesses, I would say. Here's another really exciting example, Upverter. Open source for software development has been around for a while, but open source for hardware development. This is a platform for sharing hardware projects. This is a platform for working together if you're not sitting in the same university or in the same country even, working together on the same type of stuff. So all these are things that add to how easy it will be, or how easy it's becoming to actually create something new. We can constantly build on what other people have been doing. And apart from getting the data and getting the tools to share solutions, we also have the platforms of actually distributing. And this is difficult to say how important this is. So here's a guy who created an Arduino-based Geiger counter, selling it on Etsy.com. It didn't take a lot, I mean, depending on his soldering speed, but it's not any harder than that, reaching customers today, which means that anybody can do it. And that means that a lot of people will do it. So even though, yes, it costs more money than only writing the code, we're really getting to the point where constructing, designing new hardware is a lot easier and cheaper than it used to be. So if I were head of a research department for a hardware company, I would really think hard about how to not take for granted that this is something I want to compete with, but rather think about how I want to use this. So what are we going to use it for? This whole, world of information and connected devices and all that stuff. Well, of course, being the kind of species that we are, we're using it for increasing production and efficiency. So electricity, I work on a couple of projects for electricity companies and real estate companies. I know a lot of other people do as well. And I think it's natural because energy prices are going up. Electronics prices are going down. A lot of real estate companies right now have rather large estates of houses that are just bleeding energy, and it's just costing enormous amounts of money, and that's a problem on a European scale. So of course there's a lot of money being kind of invested in this field. So I'm not surprised that this is kind of the first real smart home solutions we're seeing. But there are other interesting examples of how to make the world more efficient. Sparked is a Dutch company who put sensors in the ears of cows, helping the farmer seeing whether the cow was pregnant or not, healthy or not, when they had been milked, because as you know, they can go in and fix that themselves these days. They Twitter about it, by the way, did you know? The cows. I follow a number of the cows. That's not the sensor in the ear though, but yeah. So each cow generates something around 200 megs of data every year, and This was apparently a really good thing for the farmer, who no longer had to manually check everything. In Hollywood, they stopped talking and actually did something about the horrible parking situation. So they invested in sensors that they dug into the ground in the worst streets. I know that, how many of you have heard of concepts like this? Most of you probably. But have you actually used it? No. So in the city, they chose to actually invest in this thing, and then they had people. So they were able to charge based on supply and demand of parking spaces, which, as we know, is a huge driving factor if you want people to change their behavior, stop using the car if they know it's going to cost a lot when there's no parking spots. How long did it take them to have this investment pay off? 3 months. So again, I think we're struggling with a lot of, what would I say, fördomar, wrong ideas about how expensive this is going to be and how difficult it's going to be. It's not that damn difficult, and it's not that hard anymore. So healthcare, also as Theo mentioned, of course, is one of the fields where we see a lot of interesting things going on. I'm not so sure that these are even the best examples, but a friend of mine years ago, she was involved in the project of RFID tagging the traffic infrastructure of Stockholm. She said that her goal in life is to make sure that we have the services. That means that Alzheimer's patients do not need to be locked up, that they can actually have a life where they're allowed to move around, and that we can just run around with buses and pick them up when it's time for dinner. These things can and will and are in some cases already improving life quality for a lot of people, and I think it's a beautiful thing. There are also obviously companies that are aiming at making money at it from a rather simple thing. This is glow caps. It's a product. You plug this thing into your wall. You have the cap on your pill jar, and the cap on the pill jar is going to start blinking if you haven't, and this thing will also start blinking if you haven't taken your pills on time. Very American, but important for a lot of people. And it will start making noises, and then in the end, if you really didn't take your prescribed medicine, it's actually going to call you up and inform you that now you really have to do something about this. So this provides more, what should I say, security, not in the terms of armed response security, but health security. I've seen really interesting research on how much better people behave when they get these everyday reminders rather than just the scary propaganda from a doctor once every 3 months. So I think that's going to improve life quality. There are also these little things that we don't talk enough about when we want to do this. I want to do the really cool projects with a lot of different services. But simple products will be a lot helping our lives. So this is an umbrella that keeps track of the weather forecast, and when you pass it by in the hallway, it will remind you that you should bring it to work. I need this umbrella constantly. I buy a new umbrella every 3 times it rains, or that's what it feels like. So it's going to make our lives easier. And of course, another value, we're going to have so much fun with it. And I know Swedes are like very uncomfortable with fun somehow, but we're human. Having fun is what we're after a lot of the time. There are these toys, for instance, these little pieces. They interact with each other, so they know when they're lying next to each other. There are these little games where you teach kids about counting, or like my son now, he needs to practice colors, so that would be a way for him to do it. That's kind of interesting. We're seeing more and more apps helping us, what should I say, consume our own data. Nike Plus was this brilliant, wonderful thing. Sleep cycle apps, etc. Here are also examples of printed NFC technology. So you have all these printed sensors that you can put on whatever, and it's going to start feeding you data about your habits, about how often you've been running, or feeding your dog, or brushing your teeth, or anything that you feel like measuring. Here's an interesting example. This is a finding other people who also want to smoke gadget. Apparently a bit of a challenge these days. So, well, not all products will be for me or for you, but there are some really interesting things happening. I guess what I want to say, apart from the fact that it's not a matter of whether we're going to do this for increasing productivity, or we're going to do it for fun, or we're going to do it to improve lives. We're going to do it for all of these reasons, and there are wonderful things going to happen. But one person who summed it up, but in a different perspective, in a different context, years ago, in a way that I really love, was Chris Anderson, the Wired guy. He said, "It's taken until now for humanity to find out what we're supposed to use video," I translated this wrong, video for. So his idea is just that what happened to video was that it used to be expensive to produce, so not too many people could do it, and it used to be really difficult to distribute because there weren't too many channels to do so. And now that it's really cheap to produce and very easy to distribute via YouTube, what happens is that you're just going to have a whole lot more video content. I remember him giving the example of his son preferring watching Lego Star Wars produced by other 9-year-olds on YouTube rather than the surround THX sound super quality video in the cinema. And my 3-year-old son is now doing the exact same thing. So I think that this also relates to internet. So we're just about to understand what we're going to use this for. What is the data for? What is the possibility of connecting all this stuff? It's not going to happen until we are here, where we are today, where anybody can do it. So the challenge for organization is embrace that. Stop thinking that you can hire the best talent for money and that you can save your ideas. Don't get me started on immaterial rights. We could have an endless discussion. But just in general, if you at least ask yourself, how can our organization embrace the fact that everything is going to happen out there? How can we recognize the good stuff that's going on, steal it quickly, implement it in our processes, or whatever we need to do to actually gain from it? Before I finish off, I would also like to have some personal notes about what I think that we should be using it for. So it might get a little bit political here, but not on a left-right wing perspective. I think one of the best things that we should be aiming at is using these services to increase the value of physical stuff. So that we already place a lot of imagined value in physical stuff. How many of you think that you actually pay for when you buy a pair of trousers, are you paying for the actual value of the material trousers? The physical artifact trouser? Are you paying for the convenience of not having to go to Ullared, for instance? Yes. Are you paying for the status of having a special brand? Yes. Are you paying for having trousers in a certain style that shows that you have some sort of, I don't know, black dress designer damn identity? I don't know. Yes. So we're already paying a lot of money for values that have very little to do with the physical artifact. So how much can we do in increasing value of the physical artifacts we have around us? If you look, for instance, at a second-hand store of clothes, how much more would you pay for that? Sorry, aiming at all the women in the audience. How much more will you pay for the dress on the wall if you know what parties it's been to, what people have owned it, what countries it's visited? You know, there are just endless amounts of stories to be told and value to be created, for instance. So there are also things happening here. So Tales of Things is this wonderful example of where people are encouraged to upload the digital story around their stuff. So it says, how about tagging a building, your old antique clock, or perhaps that object you're about to put on eBay? So I think this is going to happen, and I think it's important, and I think it's really something we should take seriously. So increase value of physical, because we need to decrease our consumption, and we need to pay more for everything we buy. I also think that we should aim at increasing digital consumption. For a very simple reason, apart from the fact that it's going to happen, but digital consumption, have we kind of seen the limit of how much digital we can consume or want to consume? How many of you have this year paid for, let's say, video or music? Some nervous people like, I always steal it on Pirate Bay, but I didn't. Well, a lot of you have paid for it. So how many of you have bought digital clothing? None of you. Who are you guys? No. How many of you have paid for digital Smurf berries? This is a hugely growing sector. Virtual goods is just exploding right now. Actually, there's a Swedish success story called Stardoll that we talk way too little about, with over 100 million users. Habbo Hotel is Finnish. They have over 200 million users worldwide. It took Habbo 2 minutes to make me actually think about buying a virtual toilet visit for 2 crowns. I had to reflect a bit on what they were doing so right to make me think about that. I didn't buy it, but that was more because it was too much of a hassle, actually. It would have been really interesting to see what the virtual toilet looked like. I had this big need to do so. And there are also these other wonderful examples, apps for finding your car in the parking, or all these enhanced reality stuff that are actually happening right now. So on a scale from 1 to... No, I can't ask you about scales. How many of you think that we're kind of seeing the limits now of this digital consumption stuff? Haven't we seen it all already? We're kind of fed up with it. How many apps can you buy? Blah, blah, blah. Or do we think that we're just seeing the beginning of what digital consumption can do in terms of growth, in terms of... So how many of you think that this is going to explode even further really soon? So what I'm saying, it's important, because that way I really think that we can make a difference in saving the world. Rather than seeing this whole consumption and growth thing as something always opposed to sustainability, I think these are 2 things that we can do to increase sustainability. We can increase value of physical stuff using digital information, digital services, and we can increase the digital consumption and create endless amounts of value, services, exciting experience that people will pay for, want to pay for, and therefore create healthy businesses and, I don't know, so much fun. So that's what I wanted to share with you today. Thank you very much.